Good morning, fellow Toastmasters and guests. My name is Christina Diamore, and I'm going to be your moderator today, and I'm also your Area B4 Director. This webinar is being recorded. By turning on your camera or asking questions, you consent to being recorded, and by the District 4's option, shared on YouTube. Please mute yourself and turn off your cameras. You will have the opportunity to unmute and turn on your camera to applaud at the end of the webinar. Please enable Zoom's hide non-video participants setting as described on the slide previous to this one. To enable this on most platforms, you're going to click on the arrow next to the Start Video button in your lower left-hand corner on your little Zoom window. This will open those video settings, and you'll check Hide non-video participants in the checkbox. Later, you will have the opportunity to ask questions in the public chat. But now I'd like to introduce you to Fonta Hadley. She is an executive coach and the new owner of Eloquence, which is a soft skilled training company in San Francisco. She helps leaders to cultivate and embody positive leadership and humane conduct by honing their communication skills. I'm delighted to have her give us some tips on how to connect and develop rapport via video conferencing before talking about power dynamics in leadership. Fonta, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Just want to make sure everyone can see my screen. Can everyone see my screen? Let's see if we're doing this.
I can see it, yes.
You can see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. So just making sure you can see the next slide. No? Hold on. Oh. You can see the slide change?
I did, yes.
Okay, perfect. Just making sure we're all good here. Good morning, or for
course.
some of you, good afternoon, depending on where you are. I wanted to start today with some quick tips for how to create connection and rapport via this new format that we're all finding ourselves in, which is remote. It's hard to create connection remotely. I think it's hard for people to feel connected to other people in this format because people act differently when they're in front of a camera. People talk to their frame instead of yours. It's hard to get people engaged and respond. And I think it's harder ourselves just to feel comfortable. And then there's also the technology component where it can be glitchy and it filters you one-dimensionally. So I think there are some challenges here. And I wanted to focus on just a single thing, which is the point of connection, which is your face. Because I'm a communication teacher, I teach verbal communication, and I also teach nonverbal communication. We're going to focus today a little bit on the nonverbal because that's the one that often gets overlooked in communication. In this format of remote and video conferencing, we expect to receive visual cues. So the frame is really focused on your face and chest. And so what you do with your face is really important. When we speak in 3 buckets, and we filter ourselves in 3 buckets. We filter ourselves in positive, neutral, and negative. So when we're speaking, this is our intention, this is how it's sent out. Positive would be, an example of positive would be to motivate or inspire. Neutral would be to be impartial or let the data speak for itself. And also negative would be, of course, to dissuade or to prove wrong. The golden nugget here is that when we listen, when we perceive other people, we only perceive them in 2 categories. Neutral joins negative. So we perceive people in positive and negative. That's really important because so many people think of neutrality as professional. I can't tell you how many times someone has come to training, leaders have come to training and they said, I want to have a poker face. And poker face is the classic example of neutrality in your face. I think people want to have a neutral face because they don't want expressions to show on their face. And I think people define professionalism as coming from this clean, emotionless place. and we're going to talk about this a little bit later as well, that it's important for people to be able to get a read on you. This clean, emotionless place really comes from this classic definition, old school model of leadership. And that model is really built on strength and strong. And so when someone is trying to be strong, impenetrable, or giving no emotion is part of that classic model. But if you think about how you are perceived as either positive or negative because neutrality joins that negative read. And here's an example of that I thought would be interesting for you all, is that in public speaking, one of the things that I think makes people so scared is the sea of impassive faces that you when you stand in front of a group. I think that's what makes really significantly contributes to people's fear of public speaking, because impassivity is unnerving. When you are moving your face, there are two categories. And when people think of their face, they probably dial automatically to expression. Expression is what you do when you are speaking, and that's super positive. Great, move your face, express while you speak. But there's also this other category, which is often overshadowed and not looked at, and that is what you do when you're listening. And those expressions are called emoting. Emoting is really important, particularly in this format, in video conferencing, because it is something that promotes connection, and it is an exchange that builds dialogue with people, instead of people feeling that they are just in a monologue. So we teach this tool. We teach emoting actually as a listening tool because it helps people to listen better. And we also teach it as an empathy tool because it creates a rapport for you to start feeling what that person feels. So the tools for expression and emoting are really, really simple ones, because I want to move on to the main subject that we're going to talk about, but really simple ones are just to act interested. Act interested when you're expressing, and act interested when you're emoting. You don't need technical tools to do that. It's just a really simple way of a concept of dropping into your communication and acting and behaving as if you're interested. When we say acting interested, we also are talking about timing. So when we say behaving as if you're interested, think about it as a timing thing as well. It's the movement, but it's also the timing of the movement. It's a more fluid exchange back and forth. And for people that are a little bit more stoic, sometimes even people that are shy or a little bit more introverted, this may feel really fast for them to exchange that. But I encourage you to do it because it's a very quick way of creating rapport and connection and sending cues, because we all want to be seen and heard. And for the rest of this talk, you can just practice and move your face as I'm speaking. I'm also happy to talk about this in the Q&A as we go forward. Okay, let's talk about power dynamics and leadership. I thought it would be a very interesting topic, since I'm speaking to a group of leaders, that we unpack a little bit about power dynamics and leadership, because it's something that comes up no matter what. Power dynamics are built around winning, full stop. So this is why so many leadership models are built around strength measurements, being strong, being impervious, because your objective is to win, to overpower your opponent. But winning is the worst measurement on people. I think war, if you think about war, that's a perfect example of how it's the worst measurement for people. Respect is the highest and the best people management tool, or people tool. So I encourage you to really think about respect in your top two, because respect is where we factor in your behavior. If you're only factoring in winning, then you have carte blanche around your behavior. And that's going to get you into some trouble. Respect. Respect is a mutual agreement to consider, not an agreement to agree. And I think that needs clarification right off the bat. So many people think that if we're disagreeing, then we're in opposition to one another. No, 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 no. We are agreeing to consider, and consideration, the best consideration tool is listening. I encourage you to listen in this order: to absorb, to consider, and then to decide. What I see so much is that people are deciding, and then they absorb in relation to that decision. But respect is the agreement to consider. I will consider your position, even if we're going to be in opposition, but I will listen objectively, and then I will decide. Listening also builds trust. So listening is one of these tools that I really would love for you to lean into. So much of leadership training, people want to learn how to speak, but so much of leadership training that needs to be developed is really around listening. Listening is how we build high trust relationships. And we want people to have high trust relationships. And the way that we do that is by holding a high level of personal responsibility. High trust relationships are built from very high levels of personal responsibility. I take responsibility for me and my behavior, but I also take responsibility for you and how my behavior impacts you. And then we reciprocate. So the more responsibility we take for our behavior and impacts our behavior on others, the higher the trust is going to be in that relationship. I think when we are teaching high trust, or when we're teaching people responsibility, the two filters that I teach people are intention versus impact. The difference between an emotionally responsible person and an emotionally irresponsible person is the level of responsibility that they take for these two filters, intention and impact. When you think about compartmentalized thinking is just a box of how you organize your responsibility. I take responsibility for what's in the box, my compartmentalized thinking, and I take no responsibility for what's outside of the box. And that can get very tricky very quickly, because intentions are very difficult to read in communication. So if your whole model is built on only taking responsibility for your intention, you got a 50-50 chance, right? Because intention is something that you mean to do. So examples are my goal, my purpose, my aim. Those are your intentions. And intentions are complicated. And again, they don't read very clearly in communication. So here's an example of that. If someone says, I'm trying to grow you, then by that, if you only take responsibility for that intention, you can get away with a whole bunch of toxic behavior that comes after that, because you're not filtering in impact. And after 15 years of working with highly competitive people, and people that I also specialize in combative people, so people that go a little bit on that combative side, I can honestly tell you that toxic people, or that people that are combative, or that people are argumentative, they don't believe they are that. Our intention is really based on how we perceive ourselves. We measure ourselves by our own heart, by the measurement of my own heart. I am a good person, and so my intention is to help you. But we also have to take responsibility for the impact that we have on other people. Impact is a people skills measurement. Taking responsibility for the impact that your behavior is having on people is essential for high trust. I cannot tell you how many times I have heard, because I do prison work, I work at San Quentin prison, I did not intend to kill that person. He pulled his gun first. So again, what I'm trying to really hone for you guys is that so much of the work in leadership is to consider your behavior in relation to the impact that it has on other people. Here are some tools. In order to have responsibility, you have to have self-awareness. You cannot be responsible for things that you do not know are happening. So what happens is that the first level of responsibility training really just turns into, how do I create awareness for you? And this is where everyone can help each other. Our perceptual ability, our self-awareness of ourselves is actually not very good. Our ability to perceive behavior in other people is very astute. And that's why we can pick out granular behavior, pattern behavior, imitate people, is because our ability to perceive other people, behavior in other people, is really, really good. But we're not able to see even some of the things that we are picking out in other people's behavior. We can't see that in ourselves. So the good news is that self-awareness is a skill. You can learn it and you can get better at it. And it's imperative that people have this in order to start taking a higher level of responsibility, because you won't change what you cannot hear or see or feel in your own behavior. The most important, or the easiest way to help someone with their awareness is through feedback. Be the person in the room that upholds a respectful dynamic, and be the person who, that's not just in how you conduct yourself, but in your intolerance of behavior, of disrespectful behavior in other people. So I would love for people to self-nominate and course correct disrespectful behavior more often and give them feedback to be more proactive. You have to do it from a compassionate place and to do it with care. And this is what the next few moments is going to be about, is some tools to give feedback, because I can't tell you how many times people have said, well, how do I say that? If this person is behaving disrespectfully, how do I tell them? Here's some tools. Manage them by giving some feedback, for sure, because that's what they need. The easiest feedback tool is to separate out what from how. So when you're giving feedback to someone, you can say to them, I respect what you're saying, but not how you're saying it. Here's some examples. I totally respect your point, but not your tone of voice, which is reading as condescending. And if someone is getting loud or argumentative with you, you can say, if you just stop shouting, I can listen better. Shouting isn't necessary because I'm a really good listener and I'm interested in your point. You see how I'm separating out what they're saying from how they're saying that? You could say things like, you can just tell me that you disagree. You don't have to roll your eyes, because we can disagree without scorn and condescension. Do you see how I'm giving them a read about how that is coming out? It's coming out of their bodies, and it's coming out in their voice. The other one that works really, really well, and that I think so much miscommunication is linked to, is, oh, no, excuse me. The next thing that I think works really well is to use alignment to course correct. And again, this is part of this advocacy thing. Disrespectful behavior is usually augmenting misalignments. It's usually augmenting negatives that they've gotten very, very large. And so you can course correct disrespectful behavior by really looping it back to a positive. I'm trying to give you as many examples because people ask for verbiage all the time. So if you could say something like, you're acting as if we're on opposite sides, but we're clearly aligned. The way that you're positioning your point is in opposition, which is reading as opponents instead of allies. Alignment is batting for the same team. You can literally just step over the point of disagreement and go straight for batting for the same team. And this is an example of how we really push alignment. Another one is if someone is shutting you down, you can also go in and talk about those shutdowns. You can give feedback around, did you know that you're responding with only negatives? This entire time we've been speaking, you've only come back with negatives. You're only pointing out the gaps, the missteps, the edge cases. And it reads as if we're incompatible, but our points have so much overlap. Our viewpoints have so much overlap. We have an aligned vision for the future. So alignment's a really, really good one. It does take some self-discipline to do, because again, when someone is getting into a state or they're starting to behave disrespectfully, it's very difficult to stay calm in the face of that. But alignment's a nice one to shoot for. The other thing that people don't talk very much about, but is absolutely on the rise, and I suggest that you talk about, are levels of impatience. The reason why impatience is coming up so much, I've been tracking behavior since 2005. That's when I started tracking people's behavior. Since 2005, we are speaking between 22 and 27% faster across the board. That's crazy. We are speaking so much faster, and of course that's because our lives are so much faster and our technology is moving us so much faster. And what comes from fast, one of the main reads that comes from fast is impatience. The reason why I suggest talking about it is because it's not a big trigger point for people. You can link it to quick and fast very easily. Somehow people are less guarded about being told that they're reading as impatient than some of the other ones. If, for example, I wanted to put one example in there in relation to Slack, because this comes up all the time. Someone says something and it's very cutting, or it's inappropriate. You can privately Slack them and say, the way that you phrased that makes you look insensitive. Consider a rephrase. I think you were just in a rush. It comes from a place of advocacy, which is what we're going to talk about in just a moment. But it clearly gives them a read that the way that they have phrased that, the impact is not going to be a positive. And it was just because they were in a rush. Patience is a singular trait in this day and age because of all of the things that are going on and how quickly we are moving. The last point in relation to feedback tools is advocacy. It is really important for you to assume and speak about, well, to assume that their intention is good and to speak about that intention. Because again, when we were talking about how we see ourselves, most people see themselves as a good person by the measurement of their own heart, even if they've done terrible things. I think it's important for you to assume that their intention is good. They just don't know how to get their behavior to match. And this is really, really a good one for when someone gets defensive. You can say, I don't think you meant it to read that way. If someone says something disrespectful or condescending, you can say, again, separating out what they're saying from how they're saying, I can see your point, I can see your intention, but you should consider a rephrase because your phraseology leaves a huge margin for misinterpretation, or it's reading poorly, or it's coming off strong, or it reads as impatient. But I don't think that you meant that. That's really important because it makes people less defensive when you advocate for them. The other thing about advocacy that I think is very important is that if people feel, advocacy creates high trust. If they feel that you really do see them and see the merit in them, then what you say after that in your read of them can be very, very direct. You can help them develop awareness about themselves and help them understand how they can read to others. Advocacy is hard, especially when you're managing competitive dynamics. You can't fake it. You can't fake it. It's very difficult to advocate for someone who's behaving badly, but good people behave badly. It's an incredibly persuasive shift for people when you say, I can see what you meant. Here are the mechanics of how you could change that. I think when I'm trying to get people to shift and change their behavior, create more awareness about their behavior, change some of their mindsets, create different accountability, get people to take a higher level of responsibility, the way that I do that is that I really ask them about how they want to be remembered and the legacy that they want to leave. Your behavior leaves a legacy. And I encourage all of you as leaders to be the person that upholds a respectful dynamic wherever you go, in whatever format you communicate. Uphold it in your conduct. So behave according to the measurement of your own heart. And promote trust and safety by holding everyone accountable to a high degree of responsibility in their behavior. It is what I am asking, though it all sounds very pretty in slides, it is very difficult stuff to do. And that's why I've left a really large time here where we can answer some questions, where I understand the complexity of what I'm talking about. But I really encourage you to think about what legacy you want to leave behind. The payback for emotional responsibility is that you have high trust relationships. Emotionally responsible people are respected, admired, beloved, often for life. And they have loyalty, and people follow them. They leave a legacy of positivity and are remembered positively as a good person, as a caring person, which is how we all see ourselves. Thank you.
Absolutely wonderful there, Fonta. I believe that was amazing. We do have some questions.
Sure.
It definitely touched me, so I'm sure that we'll have some more questions here other than what we already have. But the first few questions here, let me scroll back up a little, was they were talking about how do you emote well if you have to wear a mask on video calls. This person says, I've been nodding a lot, trying to use my eyebrows, more gestures, etc. But any tips would be appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, really what happens with the mask is the face is divided. When we teach facial movement, there's 3 zones of the face. There's your brow, your eyes, and your mouth. And what a mask does is it just takes one of the zones right off the table. It really just leaves you with your eyes and your brow. And so that's tricky. What I would say, the quick answer is just use head tilts and head nods and try and move your brow more. I understand the difficulty of it. It is tricky, but you can really get warmth. The beautiful thing about a soft gaze or warmth can be transmitted through your eyes. So a lot of expression comes from your brow and also your eyes. So you still can transmit with a mask on. I have 3 children, and my children are just looking at people's eyes. They're just trying to get a read, because for them, it's a little bit crazy town, right? Does that answer the question?
I believe it did. The next question we have, Arnie asks, what are the roles of social skills and empathy in?
You mean, how are they connected?
I think that's the question, yes.
Yeah, social skills. Okay, the easiest way to put that is all of our work as human beings is not to increase our narcissism. We are narcissistic. We always come from our viewpoint. We always prioritize our viewpoint. We are very assumptive about our viewpoint. That is not our work. We do not need to augment that. In people skills, is about learning how to factor that person in to the equation. And that's where empathy comes in. That's why empathy has become such a big thing now, is because so many people going so quickly at such a rate, we're just assumptive that everyone understands the way that we see it, and we can get very impatient about the way that we see it. And that's not our work. Our work is to try and factor in, who's it going to? What could they possibly know? How can I meet that person? It's not their job to meet you, it's your job to meet them. And that's the work. And that's why empathy has just become a hot word and a hot topic right now. It's because it's hard to do. It's hard to do, especially in a high emotional state. It is hard to do. But it is the work. All that you can say to yourself is, when you are trying to do this, you are doing your best. If you're trying to factor someone in your communication, you are doing your best.
Definitely. All right, we'll keep moving forward. What materials, calendars do you use to schedule your days? I guess to not be as impatient, maybe?
Is that linked to impatience?
I'm not sure. It was
Oh.
kind of asked in that time frame.
Oh, what calendars do I use? Sorry.
Yeah.
To manage impatience? Well, I mean, I don't know about calendaring, but how I manage my impatience is through meditation, period. There's a reason why meditation is coming up and is such a big tool, and everyone is talking about it, is because it makes you aware, self-aware, and it also really gets you quiet in yourself, and it helps you really manage some of the more difficult emotions that really influence our behavior. I don't know if that met that question, because I don't think about it in terms of calendaring tools, but impatience, that's the tool that I think is a really good one for monitoring yourself, for taking responsibility for yourself. Just think of meditation as a meeting with yourself.
I like that. It looks like Alan made a comment that behaviors lead to legacy, that he loves that. So way to go. Ed asked, on Zoom, I want to see people's expressions, so I tend to get really close to the screen, which seems unnatural. Any suggestion about balancing the desire to read other people with the Zoom limitations?
Yeah, in your framing here, just let me give a quick tip around, because as a media trainer, I'm going to touch on this. We want the top of your head to touch your frame, and we want the bottom of your frame to touch somewhere on your chest. If you get too far back, then I can't see your facial expressions. And if you're too far forward, then I can see you're just really filling the screen. I would suggest to absolutely lean forward. Use leaning forward as part of your expressive skill set. When you're really emphatic about something, you can definitely lean forward. If you're interested, lean forward, absolutely. But see if you can, just as a default, keep your frame where the top of your head is touching the top and the middle is in your chest. And also, if you're trying to make yourself better read, make sure that your lighting is from the front, that you're front lit, because then they can see your face. That's really important. I think when you're trying to read others, you have the visual cues, depending on how they're lit, are hard to see. They are hard to see because sometimes people don't have the lighting that is the best for the technology. And especially when people use virtual backgrounds, it can blur out parts of their faces. If I reach for my glass, then my face is gone. It's hard to get those cues. You have to really listen for them. We can get cues from your voice and we can get cues from the face. Those are the two highest ranking EQ transmitters. And sometimes you just have to listen like mad and listen to their voice, because we have an expectation that we're going to get visual cues, but depending on their setup, you may or may not get those.
So very true. All right, the next question I'm going to ask is from Susanna. She's asking, where's your camera located? You're looking directly to us and you are not looking up or down. Also, what do you recommend for light? We can see you very clearly.
Okay. What I do is and I suggest everyone just do this now. You take your, we're on Zoom. So you take your Zoom frame and you make it as small as you can. And then you push it up as high up to the camera. If you're on a laptop, I'm just assuming you're on a laptop, but it's the same if you have a camera. You minimize the screen and you push it as far up to the camera as possible. So because I have the chat open, it's a pretty large screen, but I push the whole thing up as high as I can. And the rules with eye contact, because that eye contact, that sight line's really important. If I'm talking to you all this way, then I'm not going to be able to create that connection and rapport that I would like to create. It's really important that that sight line is lined up. So get your frame smaller and bring it right up to your camera. Or if you're working on, a lot of people work on multiple monitors, move your frame to wherever you're close to where the camera is. If people have their notes here and then they have their cameras over here, and move the frame so that you can interact with the frame as close to the camera as possible. One other thing, you do not have to talk to the light. That you do not need to do. You don't need to talk directly into the camera. That's not necessary. If you're in a monologue, then you can talk to the camera. If you speak at an all hands or something like that, you can speak directly to the camera. But really you want to be interacting with someone else's frame, not your frame, someone else's frame. So right now I'm looking at your frame because I'm interacting with your frame. I'm not looking at my frame. And that's a discipline, because it's very distracting when you're looking, when you see yourself. That's where some pretty crazy behavior comes in.
Most definitely. How do you navigate power dynamics with someone who refuses to give up the winning mindset and you have to work with them?
Yeah. That's where I think you just give them a read on how they're behaving and the impacts of that behavior. Did you mean it to sound like this? And it's hard. So for example, if here's an example of that where someone's shouting, "I'm not angry." That's a really good example of what that person was saying. "I'm not angry." Okay, well, let's just parcel some of that out. First is, you're shouting, you're visibly upset. You can give feedback around what's visible to you. You're visibly upset. And so that's incongruent with what you're saying, which is, "I'm not upset." Again, I think the sweet sauce is really just to separate them out. Because again, people don't know what their intention is. They could really, honest to God, think that they're not upset. They could really not have known until that very moment when someone says, "Whoa, you're yelling." "I am? No, I'm not." Right? It takes a high level of awareness to know what you're doing in that moment. So this is part of that feedback thing of separate it out for them. You are breathing fire. Take a moment. Do we need to take a moment? The other way to do it without addressing anything at all, this didn't come up in the presentation, but is another one, is if it's not constructive, you do not have to be subjected to that. Time out. Call it. I think we need a few minutes. This is not constructive. Let's take a pause. Because our impatience is on the rise, so many of us feel that we have to figure it out in that moment at that time. But relationships, there's no wrong time to communicate, and there's no wrong way you can come in anytime. You could revisit a conversation anytime. You don't need to get it resolved right there at that moment, especially if you're in the face of heat. Just Tio. Let's take 5 minutes. Do that in a group when someone's behaving in a way that's not appropriate. We need to take a break. Do you want to get some water? Let's resume in 5 minutes. Or to that person, hold on, hold up. We're gonna take a break. This is not constructive. What do you mean it's not constructive? Hold on. We're gonna take a moment. Take a moment.
Most definitely. Looks like any suggestions to people who have facial expression issues, extreme case of Mobius syndrome. I'm not sure what that is.
Okay, I'm just assuming that it's difficulty expressing. And if I've gotten that wrong, just pop it in the chat and clarify, but I'm just assuming that it's having difficulty moving your face. I work with a lot of people who are on the spectrum where it is hard for them to transmit emotional cues and it's hard for them to read emotional cues. It is possible to learn some of this. And if literally your face is, I'm just assuming that this is something where the face cannot move, then you can use tilting of your head, you can use nodding of your head, you can use the torso movements, you can use your hands, you can use those as supplements for nonverbal cues of acknowledgement, of rapport, of understanding. You can still notice that I'm using my face, but I'm also using my body a lot. There's so many aspects of body language. We just happen to focus on this one because of this format, because this is how most of us are communicating with everyone in this format, which is difficult for people if they do have trouble for whatever reason, because of surgery, because of whatever it is, to move their faces. Then I suggest that you move your head and you use your hands and you use your torso.
Wonderful suggestions there. Okay, we're going to ask one more and then we'll start to close this out. Looks like, comment, I'm thinking of myself as a news reporter in a live TV show. I think that's amazing. Let's see, which techniques work to get combative people to recognize that trait in themselves?
Yeah, it's that loop around around advocacy and a very clear read. That one, that's why I put it in there, is because it is the thing. I do this for a living, and I also work inside prison. I mean, I work with off the charts combative and toxic. And that's important for me to understand, like, what is that high bar, so that I can work with people that aren't necessarily in that, or I can help other people navigate that behavior. But it is literally in that loop, which is, I don't think you are intending this, but this is the impact that you're having. I can see that you're trying, I can see your point, but the way that you're behaving is a no-go. It reads negatively, and then bring it back, but I don't think that was your intent. It's in that loop. Because again, even, I mean, I think I said it in the presentation, but I'm going to reinforce it. People do not believe that they're bad people. Good people behave badly. Everybody does it. Everybody does it. We could behave better with our partners, our spouses. We could behave better at work. We could behave better at home. Everybody behaves badly sometimes. But it's in that, your intention. I think this was your intention. This is the result of the impact that your behavior is having. But I don't think it's linking up with your intention and advocating for that intention, that they're trying to come from a good place.
Liz G wanted to follow up to the minimizing the window view on your camera. Defaulting to speaker, what do you recommend to stay engaged, those off camera or people talking over each other?
Sorry, the question is, how do we stay engaged when people are talking over each other?
Yeah, and I think that's the question, that what you recommend to stay engaged, those off camera or people talking over each other. So when you're the speaker, window view on your camera, I guess, how do you stay engaged with the people that are off camera? Okay,
well, that one, you have to just be yourself. And when you are, this is also one of these fear factors why people get really nervous in this format, because of the invisible people. When you're doing public speaking in person, they're at least visible to you. You can see who they are, even though they are treating you impassively. In this format, there are just the invisible people, which is a big, big thing to work on in media training, because you have to manage that uncomfortability, and you really have to do the work so that you can just be you, despite who's tuning in, and whether you can see them or not. And that takes an enormous amount of courage. But courage is my favorite word. Be courageous, behave courageously. It is a, try as much as you can to behave like the best version of yourself, regardless if you can see who you're speaking to or not. You have to be yourself.
Definitely.
Not what you think other people think you should be, which is a hard one. Not doing all the tricks that you think might read well, but just being yourself. Sorry.
No, wonderful. Thank you so much for everything today. It looks like we've answered everything, and if we didn't, I want people to know that they can reach out to you. I believe your website, I lost it.
Oh, I can tell you.
It's www.eloquencestudio.com. So hopefully they can reach out to you that way. And also for everybody, there should be a link in the chat to give us some feedback on this wonderful chat. This was amazing. I'm so glad I was a part of it, and I think you did an amazing job. And everybody, you have a few minutes. Please come on camera and congratulate and thank Fonta for her wonderful job in giving us this wonderful presentation. You can unmute yourself as well.
Thank you, Fonta.
Thank you, Fonta.
Pleasure, pleasure,
you.
pleasure.
Thank you, Fonta.
Oh, pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.